Thanks a lot. It's my honor to host you here at the Center for the Thought of John Paul II. Neither before nor after in this or that passage have I heard him summon up such a great power of expression, such earth-shaking dramatic experience. We who participated in all the rehearsals and knew each accent by heart stood speechless and spellbound. He was a proud, powerful monarch who could not be challenged by any opposition. He was full of passion and well aware of his power. His fight with the bishop, his despair due to the betrayal of his most loyal comrades, who declared disobedience to the king, which was a consequence of a bishop's curse. All of this was staged with such a full commitment that he aroused public sympathy for the wretched monarch. Already in advance, have we enjoyed the performance of the last stanzas devoted to the King Boleslaus, which was the crowning of all our artistic efforts. And thus, our great colleague began his speech in a completely different way. He spoke in a low voice, flatly, reflexively. No pride, no power, no sorrow, no passion. When he finished, there was silence. And our team was overwhelmed with a feeling of amazement and disappointment, even indignation. We did not understand what happened. How could he change the interpretation so much and lose the most important values of the monarch? I would like to speak today about convergence of Karol Wojtyła, but before one is able to speak about convergence of Karol Wojtyła, we have to understand the context. Because I think that those who are not from Poland didn't understand much from those two excerpts. Those who are even from Poland, they don't understand it either. Because to understand, well, save for Maciej Dybowski. Because to understand Poland, you have to understand Polish culture. And you have to understand Polish history, you have to understand spirituality, all the details. Czesław Miłosz, who faced a similar challenge as Karol Wojtyła did, as we did, spoke during the banquet after the Nobel Prize he got. I'm a part of a Polish literature which is relatively little known in the world, as it is hardly translatable. Comparing it with other literatures, I have been able to appreciate its rich oddity. It is a kind of a secret brotherhood, with its own rites of communion with the dead, where weeping and laughter, pathos and irony coexist on an equal footing. History-oriented, always elusive, in this century, as before, literature faithfully accompanied the people in their hard trials. So literature is something that is very hard to grasp, and it also means that to grasp literature, we have to grasp almost everything. I cited two passages from memoirs of Danuta Michałowska, who was an actor, a friend, who participated in two first stagings of Rhapsodic Theatre that took place in 1941 on November 1st and then the 2nd 2 weeks later. Rhapsodic Theatre was established by Karol Wojtyła and his friend Mieczysław Kotlarczyk. They were two friends from Wadowice, and they were also a part of literature, of Polish literature, with its rich oddity, with secret brotherhood, with the rites of communion with the dead, with all those details that are very hard to translate. They were a part of it, and I would like also you to become, even for a moment, a part of that culture, a part of that conversation. It's easier to understand other countries where there are more important economic capital, political capital, social capitals. Because economy, money talks, politics talks. But culture, to understand culture, you have to know the language, as I said, the history, the details, all the references. So culture is not so easily translatable. Although that history is not easily translatable, and it might seem distant for you, this is also your history. And it has become the part of the world history of John Paul II as the leader of the world church. It has become your immediate history after Wojtyła days that were invented by John Paul II. And I think that culture will become, in the years to come, more and more important. Because we can see that economy doesn't work, politics doesn't work, and the only thing that we know, and we understand in Poland very well, the only thing that can work is culture, but culture permeated with the spiritual. With culture that is witnessing to God. So if our destiny is economy and politics being disintegrated, culture will become more and more important, and thus also Karol Wojtyła with his rich oddity and the rich oddity of Polish literature as well. To understand those two passages, and I will come back to those passages in a moment, we have to understand that context they were uttered in. So this is 1941, it's almost exactly 75 years ago. This is the first staging of Rhapsodic Theatre, first play of a Rhapsodic Theatre. And Rhapsodic Theatre was not only a theatre, because to perform any Polish play under Nazism in Krakow was also really a military resistance. You could be sentenced to death for cherishing Polish culture. And it is no wonder that Rhapsodic Theatre was a part also of Polish military resistance. They fought not much with sword, they fought with word. And they understood that the most precious treasure Poland has is our culture, and this is a conversion and conversation between generations. This is the only source of the power. There are some photos from Krakow to see what was the atmosphere when the play was staged. This is also Battle Castle you probably visited, and you have some pagan rites performed by Nazis in the midst of our most sacred place, one could say. And here is also Hans Frank, who is visiting the tombs, the Battle Castle, the tombs of Polish kings, and also Polish poets. This is something very special about Polish culture, that prophets, kings, and poets are buried in the same place, in the Battle Castle. One of them was Uniwersytet. This is not far away from here. You might find the place. It's Plac Bankowy, the Bank Square. And he replaced at that very place Felix Dzierżyński. So this is also what Poland did after 1989. We replaced Dzierżyńskis with our poets. And Uniwersytet was the author of the play that was staged by Karol Wojtyła and his colleagues. He was a so-called Polish bard, prophet poet. And the play, the poem he wrote, was called King's Spirit. It was divided into several rhapsodes, and hence the name of Rhapsodic Theatre. And this is a very strange history, because this is the King's Spirit is a history of an evil spirit, evil principle that is incarnated in Polish culture, that is incarnated in Polish kings, and those kings base their rule on breaking the law, all laws possible, divine and human laws, on bloodshed, of suffering of the bodies, on genocides, on murdering even the dearest and being murdered themselves. And King Spirit is representing history as the domain of demons. And Słowacki was not able to finish his poem. Only first rhapsody was published, because that play was kind of impossible. He could not, there was no conclusion to that play. And maybe the conclusion came only with John Paul II. The last part was devoted to King Bolesław. Bolesław the Bold was the murderer of Saint Stanislaus. And Wojtyła was playing that part of King Bolesław's. And mind you, this is a principle of evil that is incarnated in that king. And this is Wojtyła who is playing it. And as you know, King Bolesław killed Saint Stanislaus for challenging the power of the political. And this is Saint Stanislaus who became hero saint of Poland. So we don't have many saint kings. We have a saint queen. What is the most important and the basis of unity in Polish culture? These are saints and priests, not kings. And it tells much about Polish culture. So, Jan Karol Wojtyła, this is the photo from those times, played in such a way the role of the king spirit, of evil king spirit, that people were in awe. Neither before nor after in this or that passage have I heard him summon up such a great power of expression, such earth-shaking dramatic experience. He who participated in all the rehearsals and knew each accent by heart stood speechless and spellbound. He was a proud, powerful monarch who could not be challenged by any opposition. He was full of passion and well aware of his power. His fight with the bishop, his despair due to the betrayal of his most loyal comrades, who declared disobedience to the king, which was a consequence of the bishop's curse. All of this was staged with such a full commitment that he aroused public sympathy for the wretched monarch. So he was able to be on the side of the evil king to the extent that people will applaud him and would then judge his play as the most beautiful one. But then, after 2 weeks, something happened. He changed the way of the performance completely. And once again, already in advance, have we enjoyed the performance of the last stanzas devoted to the King Bolesław, which was the crowning of all our artistic efforts. And thus our great colleague began his speech in a completely different way. He spoke in a low voice, flatly, reflexively, no pride, no power, no sorrow, no passion. When he finished, there was silence. And our team was overwhelmed with the feeling of amazement and disappointment, even indignation. We did not understand what happened. How could he change the interpretation so much and lose the most important values of the monologue? So his friends actors attacked him for ruining their play because there was no good reaction on the side of the audience. And when they come down, he answered. I thought about all of this. This is a confession, after all. Słowacki wanted it this way. And he understood King's spirit not as an apology of the principle of evil, but as a confession of the evil king, and at the same time, he chose the side of the martyr. He chose the path of Saint Stanislaus. And I think that his interpretation was the right interpretation, because in Słowacki's poem, time and again you will find that those atrocities, those genocides that are pictured not in vainglory, but for confession. So this is what happened within those 2 weeks of 1941. These were two different interpretations of the same play. The play was a confession, and more importantly, it was also a conversion, to some extent also a confession of Karol Wojtyła. Danuta Michałowska, his friend, claims that it is within those 2 weeks that Karol Wojtyła took the decision of entering the new path, of choosing calling, his priestly calling. And that was a deliberate decision, because when he chose to be an artist, he was pressured by some of his peers and asked, will you be a priest? And he answered, no, I won't be a priest, because he answered in Latin, non sum dignus. So he answered with showing that he's not in dignity to become a priest. And therefore he chose different calling, and that was the calling of artist. And within that calling of artist, he once again rediscovered his calling for priesthood. So it was also a process, it was not an event, but this is very telling. Finally, he was told during the confession, which is also very important, by his priest, whom he knew from Wadowice, Kazimierz Fidlewicz, who was a custodian of the Warsaw Castle, of the Warsaw Cathedral. During the confession, Kazimierz Fidlewicz told Karol, the young Karol Wojtyła, Jesus is showing you the way to priesthood. So 1941 and 1942, these were the years not only of confession of King Spirit, but also of confession and conversion of Karol Wojtyła and later on John Paul II. I'm not going into details to show more those details of our culture, not to overwhelm you too much, because I want just to take one thing from the complex story, and one thing I want to take is the notion of conversion. Because Wojtyła's conversion was too important to be left with him. We have to understand his conversion. And by understanding conversion, there are many venues for us to understand also the depth of his thinking, unity of his thinking, and also globalization and globalizing potential of his thinking, and consequences that his thinking entailed. So let me start with the depth of his thinking. In biography of George Weigel, that was cited already, this is what he told. They try to understand me from outside, but I can only be understood from inside. And to understand Wojtyła from inside is just to follow that path, is also to be exposed to the culture to which he was himself exposed. So there's deep experience of conversion and ongoing conversion that never stops in Karol Wojtyła, that gives depth to his thinking. But it also gives unity to his thinking. We tend to think about Wojtyła, actor Wojtyła, philosopher Wojtyła, pope, and so on and so forth. But when we think about him once again, that the most important source of his humanity is conversion, is call for conversion, then there is no Karol Wojtyła as an actor, as a playwright, as a preacher. There's only one Karol Wojtyła who is a human person that is overcoming and going beyond oneself. For example, he also showed in 1991, and he is coming back to that moment in memory and identity. He's coming back to Warsaw Days in Częstochowa, and he's also coming to Congress of Theology, like our Congress, Central European Theology. And he says that what is special about theology in that part of Europe is not that it is a specialized discipline, specialized academic discipline, but that it is a witness of life, and that there is no chasm between life and knowledge. Life and knowledge are one thing. And good theologians are witnesses to Christ, not witnesses to latest fashionable theories. So theology becomes also a part of his life. Also philosophy is not something abstract, but is also based on life. In Fides et Ratio, there's one striking passage devoted to martyrs, but he wants to show that a martyr is the one who knows the truth, where Fides et Ratio are really on those two wings, arriving at the truth. And he defines human being the following way. The human being, the one who seeks the truth, is also the one who lives by faith. From the moment they speak to us of what we perceive deep down as the truth,
we have sought for so long, the martyrs provide evidence of a love that has no need of lengthy arguments in order to convince. The martyrs stir in us a profound trust because they give voice to what we already feel and they declare what we would like to have the strength to express. So he's also coming back to the deepest conversion, the deepest witness of martyrs for us to understand what is philosophy, not only theology, but what is also philosophy. He also shows that conversion is not only about the depth of his thinking, not only about unity of his thinking, but also about consequences. Conversion is not only confined to individual. Conversion has social power. Conversion is a sacrament, and he defined, of course, confession as a sacrament of penance and reconciliation, but also of conversion. And he writes in Families Consortio once again about the meaning of conversion. An essential and permanent part of the Christian family's sanctifying role consists in accepting the call to conversion that the gospel addresses to all Christians, who do not always remain faithful to the newness of the baptism that constitutes them saints. And conversion is reaching out not only to individuals, but also to families, and further on to whole societies. To the injustice originating from sin, which has profoundly penetrated the structures of today's world, and often hindering the family's full realization of itself and of its fundamental rights, we must all set ourselves in opposition through a conversion of mind and heart. Once again, we must all set ourselves in opposition through a conversion of mind and heart. What is needed is a continuous, permanent conversion, which, while requiring an interior detachment from every evil and an adherence to good in its fullness, is brought about concretely in steps which lead us forward. So conversion is also about society, but it's also about globalization. This is the concept that is, and it can be, the basic concept of social sciences, also theology, also anthropology, and by referring to the concept, we can also find bridges between what is most particular, for example, the second Karol Wojtyła, and with what's most universal. So conversion, I would say that humanity is about conversion, that it can be and it should be our basic concept to understand reality, and last but not least, we have to undergo conversion ourselves to understand Wojtyła. Once again, conversion is too important to leave it to Karol Wojtyła and Michał and his friends. And in the last moments of my presentation, I would like to focus on those two bridges one can find between Wojtyła's thinking and contemporary thinking. One is anthropological bridge, and this is René Girard, great French-American anthropologist. And this is a bridge to social sciences. The other bridge is to theology. This is Bernard Lonergan, who focused his theology on the notion of conversion. Let me start with René Girard. Probably you know him, so I won't go into details. What he does in his thinking, in his first brilliant analysis, The Seed, Desire, and the Novel, he showed that great thinkers and great literary masters, they undergo conversion while writing. And I think that if we consider our work serious enough, we also undergo conversion while we are writing. And he shows that conversion is reflected in the ways heroes are represented in poems or in novels. And he shows that one important reversal takes place. People who were first seen by the author, so the heroes that were first reconstructed by the authors as great individuals, then they are reflected upon and shown as lucky. And the other way around, those heroes who were represented on the margins in later versions of novels, they are represented as the heroes. And he takes example of Dostoevsky, who underwent conversion while writing, and he showed that those people who are found on the margins, like prostitutes, they are represented by Dostoevsky as those who are in the center, and vice versa. Those people who are represented in the center, they are going to the margin. And this is exactly what took place in 1941 with Karol Wojtyła. First, he represented King Boleslaus as a mighty monarch, and he did it in such a way that everybody wanted to follow him, and he got a great applause. But then he understood that he has to side with the victim, with somebody who is on the margin, and he sided with Saint Stanislaus in the final instance. And to make a long story short, because otherwise it would be a very long story, this is the definition of conversion that is taking place in great novels by René Girard. The hero of the novel, but at the same time the author of the novel, undergoes the following, what is called novelistic conversion. Deception gives way to truth, anguish to remembrance, agitation to repose, hatred to love, humiliation to humility, mediated desire to autonomy, deviated transcendence to vertical transcendence. And look once again at those two words, transcendence and love. Transcendence and love can be also understood as signs and notions that show to the experience of conversion. And this is our Congress that should be about. This is love and transcendence. This is also about articulation of the experience of conversion. Bernard Lonergan, he defined three types of conversions: intellectual, moral, and religious. Intellectual conversion guides us beyond immediacy, beyond our desires, beyond what's here and now, beyond myths, to understand the meaning. So we have to move beyond the desires to understand reality. So we have to, in other words, we have to undergo conversion to understand reality. There is also a moral conversion. We have to differentiate between satisfaction, our satisfaction, and values. And religious conversion, that is prior to all other conversions for Lonergan. This understanding that love is God's gift. And we fall in love with God. This is the religious conversion, and without that religious conversion, moral and intellectual conversions won't be full. And Lonergan tried to base his endeavor on the experience of conversion and understanding of conversion. Fundamental to religious living is conversion. It is a topic little studied in traditional theology, since there remains very little of it when one reaches the universal, the abstract, the subtle. For conversion occurs in the lives of individuals. It is not merely a change or even a development. Rather, it is a radical transformation on which follows on all levels of living, as interlocked series of changes and developments. What hitherto was unnoticed becomes vivid and present. What had been of no concern becomes a matter of high import. So great a change in one's apprehensions and one's values accompanies no less a change in oneself, in one's relations to other persons, and in one's relations to God. And I think that there's much they have in common. Girard, Lonergan, John Paul II, they all understood that the most important experience is the experience of turning from ourselves to the other, and finally to God. Finally, I would like to address the question, what are conditions of possibility of conversion? And this is also an answer why dramas and poems are so important, because they are able, in the theological terms, they are able to convey the dramatic vision of reality. If reality is not dramatic, if there is no drama in reality, there is no place for conversion. And in those elements I will present now, I would like just to
take all the threads from my presentation, to gather all the threads in one scheme. So for conversion to occur, we have to imagine the world, or in other words, see the world as the world that is torn between good and evil, as the world that is going to crisis, to eschatological dimension, to apocalypse, to war, one could say, eschatological war, but also the world where there is God, and where there is no, when the crisis is always overcome by the good. And once again, we are able to see good and evil because there is good prior to all of that, without which we couldn't distinguish between good and evil. In other words, we have to understand that there's city of God and city of man. And in Poland we understand it very well. This is the picture from Solidarity times. And the police, now we are thanking the police during both your days. Maybe you've seen those pictures when people are applauding Polish police, but it was not the thing in 1980s. So there was really the chasm between the kingdom of God, kingdom of man, and we understood the tension between good and evil. And I think it served us right. Sometimes now we are more lost than we were at those times. And the problem with our time is that we stop seeing our reality as reality that is dramatic. In modernity, there's not good and evil, there's only goodness, there's progress, there's end of history. So there's no need for salvation, no need for God who will save us from our predicament. But there's also the dark side of modernity. When there's no good, there's only evil. When the world is evil, and where there is apocalypse, there's contained, but there isn't anybody to save us. And sometimes I think that we are just veering between those two extremes. On the one hand, we are claiming everything is fine. On the other hand, we are claiming everything is bad. But there is no dramatic tension between those two poles, between good and evil. And Wojtyła also in his thinking wanted to restore the dramatic vision of reality, to enable us to convert. So he understood human beings as beings that are moral beings, that choose between good and evil. And this is our conscience that is allowing us to choose between good and evil. He also pointed to the ideologies of evil, as he called them, in memory and identity, to violence, to war, that is stronger and stronger, but at the same time, he was not left for despair, and thus you can understand his message of mercy. There's greater mercy, greater freedom that can overcome all the bad things that are accompanying us. And this is because there is God, there's Trinity, there's Christ, who can save us. And Christ, God, is also the voice of our conscience that awakens us to seeing the world as based on good and evil. So this is also the way you can understand Wojtyła, that in all his writings he's trying to build once again the dramatic pattern of reality, to show that evil and good are in constant fight, but the victory will be always on our side, for us to enable the experience of conversion. And let me briefly finish once again with Polish culture. The dramatic pattern of reality, understanding conversion, is not something that Wojtyła invented. It was a part of ongoing conversions of generation after generation. And very good example is Łuczewski, once again, whose vision of reality was very Gnostic one. So that was the dark side of modernity, one could say. In his earlier writings, he was harshly criticizing Catholic Church and especially the Pope. At one point he wrote, "Poland, beware, your destruction or your loss is in Rome." So he was very critical of the Roman Catholic Church and of the popes, because they were not in favor of Polish independence. But also Słowacki underwent in his life conversion, also conversion to papacy, one could say. And you probably know his poem from 1849, so from the year he died. It's called Slavic Pope. This is first stanza of the poem. God's bell the conclave's petty strife has stilled. Its mighty tone brings news of Slavic hope fulfilled, the papal throne. Pope who will not Italian-like take fright at saber thrust, but brave as God himself, stand at give fight, his world but dust. And he's in 1849 he's describing Slavic Pope, and it's no wonder then when John Paul II comes to Poland, he also thinks about Słowacki. He knew his poems by heart, but also he understood that there was also a conversion of Słowacki himself. And in 1987, he had it was not his official homily, but he was just chatting with the crowd. He said that he's coming here, but now he has to leave for Wawel Castle. And also for Słowacki, because Słowacki was buried in the Wawel Castle. And he's citing that passage from one of his poems, that Słowacki wrote, Poland, your loss is in Rome, your destruction is in Rome. And he says, well, that people, and he had in mind communists, they are referring to those words, that we have to be careful with Rome. But he says that, well, actually, Słowacki is right, because Polish loss is in Rome, and he is that loss. He is that individual who got lost in Rome, and now he's coming back to Krakow, and he is coming back to the Wawel Castle. Although he had, he said that he will be praying also before the tomb of Słowacki, and he will be sorry for the fact that he's twisting the intention of that passage, your loss is in Rome. But my point is here that Wojtyła could undergo such a rapid conversion because that conversion was already inscribed in great Polish poets, and in great, I would say, is always inscribed in great literature. Słowacki was drawing on Hamlet, and the story of a king spirit who is full of revenge, and there is, one could say, the other incarnation of that king spirit of the king, who is called Hamlet. This is a classical story. So Słowacki was drawing on the best, what's in our culture. That's Shakespeare. But he was also drawing on Calderon de la Barca, on Dante. So by being so particular, we are also following the path that is universal, and that conversions that are taking place generation after generation, that are going to Shakespeare, that are going to Calderon de la Barca, to Dante, and they are going to Christ himself. This is the way we can understand what is the true condition of possibility of Karol Wojtyła's conversion. He was also undergoing conversion while he was writing. Read his Our God's Brother. This is the play that was written during the conversion of Karol Wojtyła. In that play there was Saint Albert, who also underwent conversion, artistic conversion, from being an artist to being a priest. And there's also one person pictured there, Karol Hubert Rostworowski, who was one of the greatest Polish playwrights of the first half of the 20th century. And Wojtyła took his name, Hubert, as the name for confirmation.
And that playwright, he was also undergoing conversion while writing another play that's called Judas of Cariot. He was a decadent before, but while writing Judas of Cariot, he understood himself also as Judas, and therefore he could convert. So to make a long story short, there's, as Michael Oakeshott is defining culture, he says, culture is conversation of mankind. I would say that culture is conversion of mankind. And John Paul II was a part of the conversion of mankind, where love is important, where transcendence is important, where humanity is important. And what is important is that conversion should reach out for individuals, families, for societies, but also for global society. And out of many conversions of Karol Wojtyła, one is the most important one. And this is our conversion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Does this work? I don't know if it works or not. In any case, we have about 15 minutes for questions, so basically I will point to you and then you ask the question. Oh, great. I will point you. Actually, I will give you the microphone and then you can propose the question, Michał, Łuczewski. So, nobody has a question?
Now everybody has to give witness.
Thanks for the talk, very interesting. I was thinking on the social dimension of conversion that you talk about. I don't know the original name of the book in, I don't know, in Italian or in Polish. Memory and Identity by John Paul. Yeah. What would you say about the relationship of John Paul II conversion and the conversion of Poland? And the past, the problem of the memory and the future of a nation.
So I think that your question is well taken because it takes two elements, conversion and memory. And I didn't have time to elaborate on that topic, but by citing René Girard, I was referring somewhat to that. So conversion is also about remembrance. And this is remembrance about the past, this is remembrance about the history of your own culture, of your own nation, but also in the final instance, this is memory of Christ, and this is liturgy in the final instance. We do it in the memory of Christ. So the question of memory is the most important one, because without the memory, we are just confined by our desires, by what's immediate. So we have to have memory, to have distance to ourselves, and to become somebody else. And memory and history in general have such an explosive dimension, especially in that part of the world, because they are enabling us to become somebody else. And to become somebody else is also a part of the question of conversion. Without history, we will just become replaceable. And there wouldn't be any need for me to translate what's untranslatable. So this is first point. And the second point about conversion and the question of nation. I'm just a little bit worried by invoking the notion of nation, because it's understood in a different way in different countries. So Germans don't understand nation the way we do it. Also Americans have total different understanding of nation. So when I say nation, I mean cultural, spiritual community. This is what I mean by that. And Wojtyła understood that. I think that he understood nation in the spiritual terms, and he wanted to transform that community into church. When I was witnessing work for Uniwersytet, it reminded me of papal masses here, because what John Paul II did, he went with the liturgy in the middle of our atheistic cities, and he transformed a block of flags into walls of great churches. So he really, literally, he transformed our cities into churches. This is what happened in Warsaw now and in Krakow with you. And when he came for the first time in 1979 to Poland, he invoked something that was really strange. He said that what we are witnessing here, this is a